As debate across the Western world gets more extreme, Australians are increasingly sorting ourselves into little bubbles that only confirm our pre-existing biases. I fear that we're losing a commonly shared idea of what this country means. Now, if you were to randomly select, say, a 17-year-old from Brunswick, from Blacktown and from Burke, how much identity would they really share? Now, despite growing up under the same country, under the same government, their silos couldn't be more different. But I believe there's a common thread of common identity there, and it's one that we need to encourage. I think it's time to reinvest and revisit an idea that Tony Abbott first proposed as Prime Minister, the Green Army. This is a mechanism where we can take school leavers and send them to different parts of Australia to work on the likes of land management or waterway clearing or hazard reduction. Now, they could be paid and have their accommodation costs covered, but they would gain something so much more valuable: insight into their fellow Australians. We should remember that we were arguably the first nation on the planet to really commit to the idea that no one citizen is superior to another. That a rich kid is no better than a poor kid, that a kid from the city is no better than a kid from the bush. That's the Australian-ness that is really worth more than class or culture or colour. This is a deep form of patriotism that's worth so much more than these silly culture war fights that we have over the anthem or the flag. And I think that by bringing our young Australians together to do something constructive for the nation on a level playing field at a formative time in their lives, that's really an idea worth pursuing. So, Michael, you've worked a lot with the community sector and community groups in your life.
Yes.
Tell me what you think.
Well, look, I have to say I don't know if it's a great idea, in that it, to me, sounds a little bit like bringing back compulsory military service once you leave school. Now, I think most of us here would like to think we've got a reasonable grasp of the Australian identity and our fellow Australians, be they from our neighbourhood or indeed from a little further away. And to the best of my knowledge, none of us went and did work on the riverbank or whatever paid for by the government. I mean, it's a strange proposal, if I may say so, Sam, in that it's a mix of pure coalition and Labor ideology all in one, in that you've got a Tony Abbott scheme, and yet you've got obviously what would end up being a big bureaucratic spending-a-thon from the Labor side here, as you say, pay for their accommodation, throw them some coins, get everyone together. I mean, I think when I left school, I went and did a gap year. I spent 1 year over in the United Kingdom. Now, I had a great time. I learnt a lot. Might have drunk a few things too. Saw a lot, travelled. It was a wonderful education. Now, if I had to do something like this, well, that would have been denied me, because after a while you've got to go to university or TAFE or start earning some money and get a job. So, you know, I think a lot of people make their own choices, make their own way. I think we're a fairly harmonious country as it is. A lot of people say, oh, we've got racism, we've got... Look, the people that tend to say that are the ones that haven't travelled. The fact is we are a pretty united force. We've got nationalism without international nationalism, as it were. We don't have those sort of uber flag-waving forms of nationalism, but we know what it means to be an Australian. We get along pretty well. If anything gets in the way of that, it's probably government anyway with their schemes and look, I don't know if you'd win the public over.
So I should just clarify that I didn't ever intend this to be a compulsory national service. I only ever intended this to be a voluntary one, and I think Tony Abbott only ever intended this to be a voluntary one. That, yeah, we would encourage kids and we'd try to direct them and work with universities to give preferential places to kids that have gone through this program. But I should just clarify that.
Yeah. Look, I think your broader point is an important one. Like, do we have institutions that bring together everyone from all groups of society? And we were having the school debate earlier. Increasingly, schools aren't doing that either. So I think the broader problem is a worthy one. Whether you have Peace Corps or the military, we don't have those anymore. But I do think this had still devolved. It's far more on the your side of politics, Sam, where the very idea of patriotism is under threat. And we saw in Australia where Tanya Plibersek said something about the flag, about a pledge or something, and she was attacked quite mercilessly.
From her own side. From
her own side, particularly on the hard left, the Twitterati, etc. So even the idea of patriotism is a challenged one, particularly on the left. And the shared national identity, that's being eaten away from a lot of those debates. Like, I mean, I know they may be silly to some, but the culture wars are heated. you know, they're very heated. So whether it's around Australia Day or gender, etc., and identity politics more generally, the very idea of something to be proud of in Australia or Western, you know, say Karina and I we don't come from the Western tradition, but I have a great admiration for it. But if I was, say, a white guy saying the West is best or the West, there's something really proud of it, I'd be called like a racist or something, you know?
Look, Sam, I don't think it's a great idea. I think it's a fantastic idea, but I tweak it a bit. I agree, Michael, that, you know, throwing lots of money at a program like this is probably not the greatest spend of taxpayer dollars, but, you know, there is disadvantage, there, you know, is poverty, there is homelessness in every community, regardless of where you live. But yes, people do stay in silos. They stay with their, you know, own, you know, networks that they're familiar with and don't get to meet those people and to serve those people. And service is so important for young people, not only for their own, you know, for their own self-worth, for their own sense of purpose in life, but also, you know, who would have thought helping other people actually does promote good mental well-being. So I think it's a fantastic initiative that you're suggesting. Already in the school system, if someone in Australia, some schools do offer the International Baccalaureate, and that requires that students do undertake 75 hours of community service. I think a program like that extending to all Australian schools, and if someone is an early school leaver and goes to participate in an apprentice program, that they could also...
It's something where they get out of their own groups. Absolutely. And out of their own schools.
Absolutely, yeah. And learning to serve one another is really important.
Yeah.
We no longer have the same engagement in, as you mentioned, you know, different groups in Scouts, in Girl Guides, in faith communities that we did, where, you know, I grew up in a church community where, you know, our youth group would go out and paint people's houses who were disadvantaged, but young people today are, you know, stuck on the internet chatting to their friends.
It is all becoming a little siloed.
But can't you see this turning into, like, this will become extremely politicised? Like, if it's got something to do with green work, you can see the Greens getting on and go, hang on, you can't do that hazard reduction, this isn't right.
This is the point. You've got to put them into productive sort of things. So you don't have these kids running around in Melbourne with their Extinction Rebellion protests. You've actually got them out on the land clearing waterways and building fire breaks and doing hazard reduction, you know. I think it could be...
Well, look, I mean, it's certainly worthy of consideration, but I mean, there are already schemes, I suppose, like Duke of Edinburgh and things like that people can take up if they so choose.